name's Frida. I work at the Young Women's Resource Center on the empowerment team. And today I'm going to be walking you through an activity to get us thinking about and understanding the ways that gender stereotypes impact us. You can walk along with this activity on your own if you have just like a piece of paper and something to write with. I'm going to be doing it up here on the board, but yeah, feel free to follow along at home. First, we need to understand some definitions, right? And if you haven't checked out our gender unicorn video, that would be a really awesome video to watch before we do this activity together. Basically, we need to understand the difference between sex and gender. So sex is a biological term, right? And it describes like differences in chromosomes, hormones, anatomy. It's typically like what we are assigned at birth, right? Like how do doctors decide to put male or female on our birth certificate? So gender is a little bit different than sex. Gender is the way that we understand like characteristics and behaviors about the ways that different people act. So gender is socially constructed, which means the way that we get these messages about what maybe makes someone masculine or feminine, those come from like the society around us. They come from like our culture. Kind of that's where that understanding comes from. Gender identity is how someone feels internally about their gender. That's how they identify. And we talk a little bit more about that in the gender unicorn video. And then finally, understanding what a binary is. We understand gender as being a binary, right? A binary is when something is divided into two separate categories. And usually one category is valued a little bit more than the other. So we're taught by like our culture and our society that gender is a binary, right? That there's like male on one side and female on the other side. In reality, we know that this isn't true. So I like to think of gender more as like a galaxy, right? So instead of just having these 2 points, it's like a whole bunch of stars, a whole bunch of points, and people can exist really anywhere within that galaxy. You know, they might change identity, change locations, but it's really so much more expansive than just these 2 male or female points of a spectrum, right? So for this activity, we're gonna start with 2 boxes. And one box, we're gonna brainstorm and think of some stereotypes about men. For the other box, we're going to brainstorm some stereotypes about women. So a stereotype is something that we're taught by our society, by our culture, and it's basically like an assumption about a group of people. It is not true, and it doesn't mean that it's what we value or believe, but we're just gonna kind of come up with some messages that we might get from the world around us about what it means to act like a man and what it means to act like a lady, right? So we'll start with the act like a lady side. So if you wanna like pause this video and kind of brainstorm your own list of what you think it means when somebody says act like a lady, go ahead and do that now. I'm gonna start putting up some ideas that participants have come up with in our groups when we do this activity. So some things that people have come up with about what it means to act like a lady. Like pink, like the color pink. It means to like girly things. It means to have a specific type of body, right? So when people talk about being like ladylike, acting like a girl, the stereotype that we hear about how girls are supposed to look is be skinny, right? But then also be like curvy. We're taught that girls are supposed to date boys. Another stereotype that we've heard is it means to like be quiet and be polite when somebody says act like a lady or be ladylike. Another idea is like to wear dresses, skirts, and to wear makeup, right? So a lot of ideas about how girls and women are supposed to look. I'm sure we could keep going and come up with like 100 more ideas for this box. And if you have more ideas, like go ahead and write them down at home. These were just a few examples of what our participants have come up with in the past. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to what it means to act like a man. Have short hair, play sports or be athletic, be smart, date girls, do not wear makeup, do not wear dresses, anything like that. For like body type, boys are expected to be like muscular and strong. They're expected to make money. And this is a big one that usually comes up is boys are not emotional, right? Boys are not supposed to cry. That's kind of viewed as more of like a feminine trait. You can come up with more ideas on your own of these stereotypes, but these are kind of some common ones that we hear our participants and our clients say when we do this activity in group with them. Okay, before we move on, let's just take a sec to kind of like look at these different boxes that we've come up with. Think about how this like makes you feel. Think about how easy it is for one person to fit entirely in one box or the other. I mean, again, these are just stereotypes. So these things are not necessarily true. This is just kind of what the messages that we get from our culture and our society, what they tell us. Okay, so now we're gonna think a little bit about what happens to someone if they fall outside of these boxes. Like what happens to a person if they don't entirely fit in this box? Some ideas that our clients have come up with is their mental health might suffer. They might get bullied for not fitting in these boxes. They might get called names or slurs for not fitting in these boxes. They could face like physical violence for not fitting in these boxes. They could face domestic violence for not fitting in these boxes. They could face state violence for not fitting in these boxes. So that would mean that they maybe are more likely to be targeted by like police, more likely to be disciplined in school, maybe more likely to be incarcerated. And they might internalize some of these messages. So if somebody doesn't fit entirely in these boxes, if they get bullied or if they get called names, they might start to believe those things about themselves, and that can impact their mental health, that can impact their self-esteem, right? That can impact how they feel about the way that they are. So also while we're thinking about the negative impacts of not fitting in these boxes, we can also think about the price that people pay for fitting in these boxes, right? Obviously people might feel pressure to fit within these stereotypes based on their gender. And what might people feel about themselves? What might people like lose if they're forced to kind of fit inside of these boxes? Another thing we can think about when we're looking at this is which box seems to have more power, right? Which box seems to have more positive or powerful attributes in it than the other box. So these boxes are a really good way to visualize patriarchy and sexism. So patriarchy is a male-dominated system that values like masculine male attributes over like female or feminine things, values men over women essentially. And sexism, that is the belief that these stereotypes are true, right? That's the belief that men have to act a certain way, that women have to act a certain way. And it's also the belief that men are better than women. Patriarchy, sexism, these things all influence everything we see on this board, right? And some other isms in our society influence these things too. So outside these boxes, we're gonna put racism, we're gonna put homophobia, we're gonna put sexism, and we're gonna put transphobia. And all of these bigger, violent systems of belief, they uphold this patriarchy, this sexism that we see here, right? So these things are kind of always influencing these boxes, and they influence the things that might happen to people if they don't fit in those boxes. Another thing to note about patriarchy and sexism is that it impacts everyone, right? But it can be particularly dangerous for women who fit or don't fit into this box of stereotypes, right? They might be more likely to face violence for not fitting into that box, and that might be because of sexism, right? Where it values like male stereotypes over female stereotypes. So as we're looking at this board here, or maybe as you're looking at what you came up with on your paper at home, it's really good to think about like, how does this impact us, right? Like, where do you see yourself fitting in these boxes? And how does it impact like how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about our gender? So this is a really toxic system, right? Nobody benefits from this. because we know that as individuals, as people, we can't just all fit into boxes like this, right? And nobody should face these forms of violence for not fitting into a box. So to kind of wrap up this activity, I want to challenge everyone watching this video, everybody who is participating in this, to think of one way that you can challenge gender stereotypes, right? So what's one thing that you can do in your day-to-day life, at school, at work, at home, within yourself maybe? Like, how can you start to challenge these stereotypes and break them down? Because challenging these boxes, kind of like deconstructing them, that's going to help the rest of the system fall apart too, right? So that's something that we can do on our own, and we can encourage others to do, to kind of like break down this like nasty and toxic kind of binary that we live in.